watching Beyond Market. Welcome. I'm Esther Awoniyi. Good to be back, and of course, good to have you back with us on the show. Today, we'll explore ways to drive investments between Nigeria and the United Kingdom. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag Beyond Market. You can also send your thoughts and your comments to my Twitter handle too. It's at Esther O. Awoniyi. And with already strong historical ties across the continent, the British government is looking to strengthen its position with an investment summit that aims to showcase potential areas of partnership with Africa. Christopher Pycroft, Head of Office for Nigeria at the U.K Department for International Development, joins me today as we explore ways to drive investments between Nigeria and the U.K. Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
I know the DFID has been doing lots in Nigeria, but I want us to quickly just focus on this summit in London, taking place on the 20th of this month. Talk to us about it. Why is this summit significant?
Yes, I mean the summit is the first major international conference that the new government, which was recently formed, has called. It's an opportunity to bring together governments and business people from 21 African countries who will be attending the summit, which will take place at the O2 Arena on the 20th of January. We're going to be exploring a whole range of different initiatives around trade and investment, and it's a real opportunity to really increase the amount of investment opportunity, deepening and strengthening the relationship between the UK and all of Africa. Nigeria is pivotal to that process. Nigeria has the largest economy, the largest population, strong historical links. British Airways, for example, first flew to Nigeria 81 years ago. Other companies have got an equally long history of engagement in Nigeria. So there's lots of reasons why we would look to try to develop and strengthen that relationship.
Now, I know that, obviously, as you just said, there are lots of UK businesses here in Nigeria, and I suppose the operating environment, the business climate is one that's familiar to the UK and, of course, companies. But I want to assume that there are all the new companies in the UK who are first-timers and looking to just see what, perhaps just test the waters, just see, what the environment is and all of that. But what would you say that perception is changing? What role is perception playing at this point?
The UK and Africa Investment Summit gives us a real opportunity to change some of the narrative about what it means to work and invest in Nigeria. As you say, there are a lot of UK companies that have got a strong history of engaging here. There are a lot of new companies, a lot of startups in the UK, a lot of companies which are focused on tech and innovation that are looking for new and innovative markets. They need to hear about Nigeria, about what's going on in Nigeria. Of course, there are constraints, there are complexities and difficulties of engaging in Nigeria, and I'm sure that we'll get an opportunity to talk about some of those. But on the whole, Nigeria offers really strong opportunities for new and emerging businesses from the UK to be able to come in here and really support Nigeria's growth and development. At the moment, the amount of trade which is done between the UK and Nigeria is about £5.1 billion a year. So it's not an insignificant amount of money, but given the size and scale of Nigeria's economy, there's a real opportunity for us to grow that quite significantly over the coming years.
Speaking about opportunity for this, and we'll talk about the outcomes that you're expecting, but are there particular sectors that you're focusing on that that could come through in terms of the engagement conversations and taking them from point A to B at this summit?
Yeah. The Africa Investment Summit represents part of a process. There's been a whole range of events leading up to the Africa Investment Summit, and then there will be other engagement which will come after the Africa Investment Summit. We're looking at trade and investment, we're looking at manufacturing, we're looking particularly at climate change and ensuring that investments are climate sensitive, climate smart, particularly because the UK is going to be hosting COP26 in Glasgow at the end of this year.
So, but what are you hopeful for in terms of the outcomes of this summit?
This is going to be about putting people together who perhaps haven't had an opportunity to meet in the past. So it's about putting government officials together, it's about putting government and private sector together, and it's about putting private sector together with private sector. There's going to be a whole range of different workshops which will take place on the day, before and afterwards, looking at the various different themes on infrastructure, on manufacturing, on investment opportunities, on technology. There's going to be a specific event on women involved in technology. called the Female Tech Founders. There are 5 representatives coming from Nigeria who are involved in new startup initiatives in the tech sector. They're going to get an opportunity to meet counterparts from across Africa as well as from the UK to look and explore new ways in which they can work collaboratively together.
Now, for those businesses who are already doing business here in Nigeria, what are the common, and for those who are also looking to come, or maybe just recent entrants, what are the common entry barriers for them? What do they tell you in terms of the issues and the challenges, especially as first-time businesses, or perhaps even existing?
Yeah. No, I think it's the same. There are obviously challenges and constraints as well as opportunities. The challenges and constraints, some of these are around the macroeconomic situation, some issues to do with the exchange rate and the level of the naira on international markets. That creates some constraints. There are significant constraints around trade and around moving trade across borders and around customs. It's very complicated to be able to move trade in and out of Nigeria, and DFID, along with other members of the British government, are working with the Nigerian government to try to bring forward this idea of a single window, whereby it's like a one-stop shop where businesses will have a dedicated agency which will be able to help them to navigate trade in and out of the borders. We see that as being really significant to be able to stimulate increased flows of trade between Nigeria and the rest of the world.
How is that going?
It's early days. We are having discussions at the moment. There seems to be a lot of encouraging noises coming from the Nigerians, particularly around the airport. This, I think, is the area that we'll really start to see developments take place. And if we can crack it for the airport and for air freight and cargo coming in through the airport, there'll then be the opportunity to extend this out into the ports as well. And this could remove a really significant barrier to increased economic trade and development here.
Now, still on trade, I want us to just quickly expand this a little bit. Now, with Brexit still not sorted, I know that this is a time when also will create an opportunity for the UK to maybe have fresh discussions with even existing partners such as Nigeria. I'm just wondering, will those conversations be different now that if it does get sorted and the UK does leave? I'm just wondering, what would policy for each country, especially now, let's focus on Nigeria now, how would it be different? Would the negotiations, would it be, I'm just wondering, what would be different?
Yeah. Brexit, which will take place at the end of this month, then will allow the UK to be able to undertake its trade relationships with individual countries. So it will be free from what the government has seen as some of the constraints of operating through the European Union system. This is going to give an opportunity for there to be a really assertive negotiations between countries such as Nigeria and the UK of benefit to both sides. For me, from a development perspective, this is about deepening and strengthening this relationship. However, we don't expect there to be really significant changes very soon. And in fact, about 70% of Nigeria's current exports will still be free into the UK. So that regime won't change, at least initially, until we get into the deeper specifics of the trade negotiations. Okay,
let's take a deeper dive into the DFID the projects in Nigeria. I know I was just looking at the tracker, there are quite a number of them. Let's just focus on perhaps those that where we've seen the most, the biggest impact, as it were. Speak to that point. I saw one on corruption. Perhaps you can start there.
Yeah, we have a number of different initiatives which are working with the government authorities to try to address corruption, which, as I'm sure you're aware, is one of the key constraints both to development and to trade and investment in Nigeria. We're working with a whole range of Nigerian anti-corruption organisations to strengthen their capabilities to be able to tackle corruption. And one of the big success stories has been to look at loot which has been taken from Nigeria and then put into the UK. We've been successful in identifying, I think it's about £280 million worth of stolen assets which were taken from Nigeria, and these have now been returned to the Nigerian authorities. So this is a net benefit to Nigeria, and there's more to come.
I'm just wondering, how widespread is that? And not just Nigeria, just for the African countries that obviously the UK has partnership and of course talking about foreign policy. How widespread is that? And is this just being extended to Nigeria alone, or is the UK government also working with other African countries who or in similar situations where they're seeing a lot of loot also being taken or shipped off to the UK?
Nigeria is a really strong example of where this has worked
Okay.
really well. And there are many lessons which are being learnt by other countries to think through how to achieve the same kind of success rate that we've had here in Nigeria. Corruption is a widespread problem, and it's something that needs to be addressed. And we're really working hard with the Nigerian authorities to be able to support them in their anti-corruption efforts.
Talk us through also some of the other key projects on the DFI. I know there are a number of them, but I just wanted to home in on those that are, like I said earlier, seeing the biggest impact. Apart from corruption, what else?
All right, let me talk you through the full range of programs that we're involved in. At one end of the spectrum, we have a very large humanitarian assistance program. As I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of conflict across different parts of Nigeria, and particularly at the moment in the northeast. So we're working with a lot of our partners, particularly in the UN, to ensure that people who are affected by conflict and other problems receive emergency humanitarian assistance. So that's an important part of our portfolio, and we'll continue to do that as long as there is a need for it. We're then involved in a whole range of different kind of service delivery programs. So working to strengthen systems in health, in education, in water and sanitation, and in nutrition. There's been some really spectacular results in terms of providing health service provision, primary health service provision, in terms of providing primary education support, in terms of improving nutrition outcomes, particularly for young children and for pregnant women. So that kind of falls into our basic services aspect. We're then involved in a whole range of different initiatives to provide governance support. And this, for me, is absolutely central to our initiatives to be able to drive and stimulate development here. Development challenge in Nigeria is a governance challenge. It's about ensuring that the government is in the right place to be able to provide quality services to the whole population. So in the governance space, we're involved in a whole range of different initiatives, which include, for example, trying to strengthen taxation systems, looking at macroeconomic issues, looking at how we can work on anti-corruption issues, which we've already spoken about, support for election processes, a whole range of different governance initiatives. And then, which is particularly important from the perspective of the UK Africa Investment Summit, is the work that we're doing in the private sector, both working with the government to improve regulatory environments, but also working with private sector organisations to be able to create and generate really strong jobs. And that's also been very successful. Over the next 5 years, DFID is going to commit over £200 million to support private sector initiatives here in Nigeria, with a particular focus on areas to do with agriculture, because diversifying out of the oil sector and into other sectors is critically important.
If you're just joining us, Chris Pycroft, Head of Office, Nigeria UK Department for International Development, is our guest today on Beyond Markets, and we have been exploring ways to drive investments between Nigeria and the UK. Chris, thank you for your time so far. Still speaking of investments, we'll come back to some of the other DFI projects, but I wanted us to quickly talk about foreign direct investments. I mean, just looking at the numbers for Nigeria last year, they weren't too fantastic. I'm not talking like I was telling you earlier, not hot money, just actual foreign direct investment. And I know that most of the analysts I spoke to last year kept saying that for the Nigerian economy to grow, for the private sector to be able to assist and gain traction, we need those investments to come in. Just share your thoughts on working on the ground, and perhaps some advice, recommendations, if you will, for the government in terms of how we can remove those barriers that are still existing and actually be able to attract that much needed foreign FDI.
Okay. I think, Esther, your analysis is absolutely correct. I think foreign direct investment can be a real game changer, not just because of the resources that it brings into the country, but it usually comes with kind of best practice international standards for how that resource is being used, which can then lift and elevate processes within the country. The UK Africa Investment Summit is going to be a real opportunity to explore some of the constraints and challenges, but also some of the real opportunities that Nigeria can look to exploit in the future. Let me just talk a little bit about CDC. CDC is kind of the UK's development bank, and it brings in resources to allow a whole range of different companies that perhaps wouldn't get these kind of opportunities to get access to resource to be able to fund their initiatives. CDC has been operating in Nigeria for 70 years now. Nigerian companies that perhaps wouldn't have been able to operate without that kind of support. And those companies themselves employ about 41,000 people. So that's one way in which the UK is looking to continue to support foreign direct investment into Nigeria. There are other ways that we're looking to do this, but you're absolutely correct. FDI is critically important to be able to move things forward.
I know that you have your hands in that also. Could you just walk us through what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I mean, agriculture is going to be critical for the long-term success of Nigeria's economy. About 40% of the population currently work in agriculture, but it only contributes a small contribution to the overall gross national product. And there are some real low-hanging fruits. Small improvements in terms of fertilization, soil utilization, and irrigation. Irrigation, less than 10% of Nigeria's agriculture is irrigated. And with what's happening in terms of climate change, there's a need to move that technology into the agricultural sector and then see a real improvement in terms of agricultural productivity. But there are other aspects that DFID is working on to ensure that Nigeria benefits from its agricultural product, such as cold chains and the infrastructure which is needed to be able to take agricultural product from where it's produced to the market. And we're also looking to explore areas to be able to process agricultural product, because that's where the real value is added. It's not just in terms of producing the raw product, but when it gets canned. Exactly. And then if we can overcome some of the constraints to export, we can see this market really take off.
No, but for UK companies, could that be part of conversations that we'll hear or see at this summit?
Exactly. And we've been working on particular specialist briefs in the agricultural sector. Individual briefs on poultry, on pork production, on wheat production, cassava production, which will then be distributed at the UK Africa Investment Summit, so that people who are interested in this sector are going to be aware of the opportunities in the agricultural sector here in Nigeria.
Just looking at growth projections for sub-Saharan Africa this year, still below 4 or 5%.
Yep.
I'm just wondering, is that a concern for would-be investors also? Because, I mean, we're seeing broad softening growth. I mean, the global economy is not doing too fantastic anyway,
exactly.
So it's everywhere. But I'm just wondering, for sub-Saharan Africa, the amount of faith, the amount of optimism for would-be investors, would that be enough firepower to keep on the interest, I mean, going forward?
I mean, it's a really important point. I mean, the growth rates here in Nigeria have declined over the last 2 years. What's particularly worrying is that the level of economic growth is being far outstripped by population growth. Nigeria has got an opportunity to be able to benefit from what's called a demographic dividend, a young, vibrant, energetic population which can really drive economic growth if the opportunities are there. But when you see gross national product in decline, when you see some of the constraints to inward investment that we've been speaking about, then that is a real cause for concern. That's why we're working so closely with the government, with the finance minister, with other decision makers, to be able to work with them to overcome some of these constraints.
Now, I'm just wondering, I mean, just going forward, how optimistic are you? Because when we talk about the youth dividend, some other analysts may say or would say, it could also be described as a ticking bomb if
Yes.
those jobs are not created. If the government perhaps also the private sector does not also contribute in those labor-intensive sectors such as agriculture
Yes.
that we talked about, it could be a problem down the line. But would you say that enough is being done? I know that the UK, I mean, through the DFID, you're doing your own part and all of that. But would you say that we need more stakeholder involvement, more hands on the table, as it were, to quicken the pace? Because I'm thinking that perhaps that's one of the biggest challenges. A lot is being done, but the question is, how much? Is it enough? Can we gather more momentum?
You're absolutely right. More does need to be done. And when we look at the demographic structure here in Nigeria, you see that there's a clear division between the north and the south. It's almost, there's a really stark division between the north and the south, and the real population growth taking place in the north, and also we're not seeing the same kind of economic development and growth taking place in the north of the country as we see in the south, particularly down here in Lagos. So something needs to be done to change that, and we're working in 3 focal states, in Kaduna, in Kano, and in Jigawa, working very closely with the state governments there to think through how we can stimulate economic growth so that we can turn this, as you say, this ticking time bomb of demography into a demographic dividend which is going to benefit everybody.
Now, at the moment, between the UK and Nigeria, trade volumes, that you said 5.1 billion pounds. I'm just wondering, is there a particular target? Is there a 5-10 year, plan in terms of where the UK wants that volume to be going forward?
We're not setting particular targets, but I think that there's appreciation both from the Nigerian government and from the UK government that this figure is lower than it should be. That there are real opportunities here. There are some real low-hanging fruits. There are some simple reforms. There are some simple initiatives that could be put in place which would really stimulate economic growth. Agriculture, as you've already mentioned, is one area where we think that there are real benefits to be accrued from some simple policy changes and then from some smart, innovative approaches across the sector.
Now, for the typical UK investor, what do they find most peculiar or perhaps most intriguing about the Nigerian market?
Everybody speaks about Nigeria's entrepreneurialism, and we see this all the time when we live here. There are amazing young people with incredibly creative ideas who really want to change the dial on the use of technology, on the use of digital. Nigeria is one of the largest mobile markets in the world. More people have got access to the internet through their mobile devices here than anywhere else in Africa. That's going to be super important for investment, because you're missing out whole generations of analog technology moving straight to digital technology, allowing people to be able to bank with their mobile phones, to be able to communicate, to be able to buy and sell and trade goods. Everybody's looking at the digital dividend. Everybody's talking about entrepreneurialism.
We're talking about the fourth industrial revolution at the moment.
And Nigeria can lead that.
I mean, obviously, it has also come with opportunities for the country to leapfrog, and we've seen that especially in the ICT sector, and of course spreading across other sectors. But at the heart of it, regardless, Nigeria is still a country that's dependent on oil. And to what extent is that a concern, being able to quickly diversify and focus on other sectors to get much needed revenue and jobs, so that we do not get caught? Because these days we're hearing so much about electric cars and how oil gluts here and there. I'm just wondering, does that paint, what kind of picture does that paint for investors for the country?
You're absolutely right. Being overly dependent upon oil and gas is a concern because of the distorting impact that it has across the rest of the economy. But over time, we've seen Nigeria's dependence upon oil and gas significantly decline. It's no longer the largest economic sector in Nigeria. The largest sector is now services. Agriculture is also moving forward, manufacturing moving forward as well. So there is a good story to tell about the way in which Nigeria is coming away from this over-dependence upon oil and gas to diversify. More needs to be done. We see agriculture as being an area where this could really move forward quite quickly.
Okay, now let's wrap this up. Let's wrap it up with the DFID project also. Funding. I know there's a budget for this year. I'm just wondering, are you going to just keep existing projects? Will new ones be added? Will some be taken out? And are you looking forward to, could there be possible higher funding for the work on the ground?
Nigeria is hugely important in terms of DFID's engagement. It's our second largest program in Africa, our third largest program worldwide. This year, the total budget is approximately £275 million. On an average year, we would look to spend between 225 and 250 million. The volume of money, though, is not the issue. It's what we do with that money to catalyse processes of change, particularly working with the government, but with the private sector as well, catalysing those processes of change to have a significant multiplier effect. Programs usually have a lifetime of about between 5 and 7 years. Some last longer than that or get renewed, particularly if they're being successful. But we're always designing new programs. We're always thinking through what we can do to draw on best practice elsewhere in the world, to draw on opportunities which are presented here in Nigeria, to be able to ensure that we're driving really significant value for money for UK taxpayers from our development investment, but also delivering quality development outcomes for the Nigerian people.
Okay. Chris, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for being on our show today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I've been speaking to Chris Pycroft, as the head of office in Nigeria, UK Department for International Development. Well, that's it on Beyond Markets. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Remember, you can watch the show at 5 p.m. West African time daily and have access to all previous episodes of Beyond Markets on our website. That's cnbcafrica.com. You can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Markets. And of course, you can send your thoughts and your comments to my Twitter handle too. It's at Esther Awoniyi. For myself and the team, it's bye for now.